She just wanted to learn. But on her very first day of school, she was sent home for wearing braids, lovingly done by her grandmother. Humiliated in front of the entire class, she almost believed her hair was a problem until an unexpected authority showed up, and what he did left everyone speechless. Before we go on, let us know where in the world you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe. It was the first Monday of the school year, and the sun hadn't even fully risen when Amara's grandmother finished tying the last colourful bead at the end of her braided hair. 12-year-old Amara sat still on the wooden stool in the centre of the small living room, her back straight, her eyes wide with anticipation, and her lips curved in a gentle smile. Today wasn't just the start of a new school. It was a fresh chapter in a new neighbourhood, a new life. Her mother, Liane, handed her a lunchbox wrapped in foil with the familiar scent of warm cornbread. "Don't forget who you are," she said, brushing her fingers over Amara's cheek. Her voice was soft, but the words carried a weight passed down through generations of dignity, of resistance, of survival. The school building stood tall and grey, with wide stone steps and columns that tried too hard to impress. The place had history, and not all of it was kind. Most students wore pressed uniforms, identical backpacks, identical shoes. The parents at the gates wore suits or sleek dresses. Amara, with her rainbow-coloured beads clicking gently as she walked, stood out like a sunrise in a foggy morning. She didn't mind. Not until she reached the hallway just outside classroom 2B. A woman stood there, tall, sharply dressed, her silver blonde hair pulled into a tight bun that hadn't known a wrinkle in decades. Her name was Ms. Calloway, and her presence alone seemed to silence the corridor. She was the principal, but more than that, she was a keeper of order. The kind of order that didn't make room for questions or colour. She didn't smile when she saw Amara. Her eyes scanned the child from head to toe, then stopped at her hair. Her mouth tightened. "Young lady," she said, voice clipped, that hairstyle is inappropriate for this school environment." Amara blinked. She clutched the strap of her backpack. It's just my hair," she replied softly. Miss Calloway took a step closer, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. "It's distracting, loud, against the dress code. We maintain a certain image here, and your presentation—" She glanced at the other students who had begun to watch. "Is not aligned with it." The hallway, once alive with chatter, fell into a heavy silence. A group of students near the lockers paused mid-conversation. One of them snickered. Amara felt the warmth in her cheeks turn to fire. "But my grandma did it for me," she murmured, eyes glistening. "And I'm sure she meant well," Ms. Calloway said, voice like glass. "But this isn't appropriate. I'll have to ask you to wait outside the office while we notify your parents. You are not permitted in class until this is corrected." She didn't wait for a response. She simply turned, heels clicking, and left the girl standing there, alone, small. Amara's hands trembled as she gripped the straps of her backpack tighter. Her chest felt heavy. She slowly turned and walked toward the office, her beads clicking with each step, a sound that now felt too loud, too wrong. Inside the school, life went on. Outside, the air was crisp with early morning. A black town car with tinted windows was parked near the front entrance. The driver stood by the vehicle, holding a clipboard. The back door opened. A tall black man stepped out, adjusting the cuffs of his navy blue suit. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the sharp alertness of someone who had seen both politics and people up close. Mayor Elias Benton was scheduled for a brief visit. A simple gesture to open the school year, cut a ribbon, shake some hands, but just as he turned toward the entrance, he paused. A figure caught his attention. Sitting alone on the edge of the concrete steps, facing away from the school, was a young girl. Shoulders slumped, head down. Her small fingers were nervously twisting a strand of colourful beads. He watched for a moment longer. Then slowly, he started walking toward her. "Mind if I sit here?" the man asked gently. Amara turned her head, startled. She hadn't heard anyone approach. She looked up into the eyes of the stranger, kind, curious, no judgment, just warmth. She shrugged, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand, and scooted slightly to the side. Mayor Elias Benton lowered himself carefully beside her, the crisp fabric of his suit bending with a grace that didn't match his position of power. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Only the occasional chirp of morning birds filled the space between them. "I like your hair," he said quietly. Amara blinked. "Really?" He smiled. "Reminds me of my sister's. Back when we were kids, our aunt would spend all night braiding it. Took hours. But she always said it was a crown." The girl didn't say anything, but her lips twitched slightly, just enough to hint at the start of a smile, and then, as if the words had been waiting behind a dam, they came out all at once. "She said my hair is distracting, that it doesn't fit the school, and I didn't even do anything wrong." Her voice cracked. "It's my first day." Mayor Benton looked toward the school building. "Who said that?" "The principal, Miss Calloway." She hesitated. "She didn't even ask my name." His gaze lingered on the main entrance for a long moment. Then he turned back to Amara. "Do you mind waiting here just a little longer?" She nodded. He stood and walked with purpose toward the front doors. Inside, the school was humming with the usual first-day chaos. Late students, announcements over the intercom, the smell of fresh paint and new notebooks. Ms. Calloway was standing near the faculty lounge, sipping coffee from a porcelain cup. She looked up as the mayor approached, her expression brightening in an instant. "Mayor Benton," she said, extending her hand, "a pleasure as always. We're honored by your presence." He shook her hand briefly. "Ms. Calloway, I was hoping we could have a word before the assembly." "Of course. My office?" He nodded once. The door shut softly behind them. She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. He remained standing. "I just spoke with a young girl outside," he began, "sitting alone. Suspended, apparently. Over her hair." Miss Calloway's smile faltered slightly, but her tone remained composed. "Ah, yes. Amara Walker. She showed up with a hairstyle that's, well, disruptive to our environment. We have guidelines, and we expect students to maintain a professional appearance." He raised an eyebrow. "Professional. She's 12. She cleared her throat. "Still, we believe in preparing our students for future success. By punishing them for how they look? It's not about race," she added quickly. "It's about uniformity, discipline, standards." He studied her in silence, then slowly walked over to the window, looking out at the courtyard below. "When I was her age," he said, "my older brother came home crying because a teacher told him his hair was unruly. My mother, a woman who worked double shifts cleaning offices, spent the whole night redoing his hair, even though she loved the way it looked." He turned to face her again. "Do you know what he did the next day?" She shook her head. "He shaved it all off, bald, said it was better to not exist than to be seen as a problem." Miss Calloway swallowed, but said nothing. Mayor Benton took a deep breath. "This isn't about rules. This is about identity, dignity, and the fact that a little girl's joy was crushed before the school bell even rang." The silence was deafening. He stepped toward the door, pausing just before opening it. "There'll be a meeting this afternoon with your staff and Amara's family. I suggest you be ready to listen." Meanwhile, in the front office, Amara sat on a vinyl chair with her backpack on her lap. She didn't know what the mayor had said or done, but when a kind-faced woman in a soft cardigan appeared and gently asked, "Would you like to come with me for a moment?" she nodded. The woman led her down a hallway away from the main classrooms, through a side door, and into a quiet garden space with benches and flowering shrubs. It felt different here, warmer. "Would you like some water?" the woman asked. Amara nodded again. They sat in silence for a while. "You know," the woman finally said, "when I was your age, I was told that my braids were too much. So I hid them. And for years I thought I had to change myself to be accepted, but I learned something. The people who matter, the ones who really see you, they don't want you to shrink. Amara looked up. Do you think they'll let me come back? The woman smiled. I think they'll have no choice. Back in the principal's office, Miss Calloway stood alone now, staring at her reflection in the window. She had built her entire career on discipline, uniformity, image. But something in the mayor's voice, that quiet mix of disappointment and truth, clung to her like humidity. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure if her rules still protected anything or anyone. And outside, Amara sat beneath a tree, the wind gently playing with her beads. The staff meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m., just after the last bell. Most of the teachers had expected it to be routine. Another checklist for the new semester, maybe a reminder about hall passes or standardized testing. But the moment they stepped into the library and saw Mayor Elias Benton seated calmly at the head of the long table, flanked by Amara's mother and grandmother, they knew this was not routine. Ms. Calloway entered last. Her posture was immaculate, her expression unreadable, but there was a slight tightness in the corners of her mouth, the only betrayal of tension. The mayor stood. Thank you all for coming, he began, his tone steady. I won't take up much of your time, but something happened this morning that I believe warrants reflection and action. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. This school suspended a student, not for fighting, not for skipping class, not for bullying, but for wearing her hair, her natural cultural hair, in a way that some deemed inappropriate. A ripple moved through the room. Some teachers looked down. A few exchanged glances. One woman, Ms. Harris, a black science teacher in her 30s, shifted in her seat, her jaw clenched. The mayor continued, Amara is 12. She was excited for her first day. Her family braided her hair the night before, celebrating this moment. And instead of being welcomed, she was humiliated, silenced. He turned to Miss Calloway. And I want to understand why. The room fell into silence. Ms. Calloway inhaled slowly. We have a long-standing dress code, she began. It applies to all students. We maintain certain expectations for appearance to preserve a focused learning environment. Ms. Harris couldn't stay quiet anymore. With respect, Ms. Calloway, I've been here 6 years, and I've seen plenty of violations that never led to suspensions, colored nails, hoodies, earrings. But this was about something else. Several heads nodded subtly. The mayor looked around. I'm not here to punish anyone, but I am here to challenge the culture that made this kind of decision seem acceptable. He turned to Amara's mother. Mrs. Walker, would you like to say something? Leanne stood slowly. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held fire. My daughter is smart, kind. She reads at a 10th grade level, and she was so proud of those braids. She felt beautiful, strong, seen. Her voice cracked. But when she came home crying, asking if her hair made her bad, I didn't know what to say. Silence. Then the grandmother stood straight-backed and quiet. She was born free, she said. My granddaughter. And I won't see her taught to shrink herself. The mayor nodded. I've spoken with the superintendent. We'll be reviewing the district's dress code policy to ensure cultural protections are clearly upheld. He turned back to Miss Calloway. But we can't rewrite culture on paper alone. It has to start in rooms like this, with conversations like this, with leaders who are willing to see past what's comfortable. Ms. Calloway didn't speak, but her shoulders dropped slightly, and in her eyes something shifted, not defensiveness, but disorientation. As if a mirror she'd trusted for years had suddenly shown her a different reflection. That evening, in a quiet apartment 3 blocks from the school, Amara sat at the kitchen table doing math homework. She still hadn't returned to class. Her mother moved around the kitchen checking the oven. Her grandmother quietly read a book in the corner. A knock at the door startled them all. It was Ms. Harris. She stepped in gently, carrying a tote bag filled with folders. "I brought Amara her class materials, and something else." She reached into the bag and pulled out a small, laminated card. It showed a young girl, no older than Amara, wearing vibrant braids and smiling into the camera. At the bottom, in faded black letters, was a name, Cheryl Green, class of '89. She was the first black student to graduate from that school with honors, Ms. Harris explained. She wore braids every day, got mocked for them, but she never took them out. "I thought Amara might want to know she's not alone." Amara took the card carefully, holding it like something sacred. "She looks like me," she whispered. Ms. Harris smiled. "She was you, and one day someone else will be you too." The next day, Amara returned to school. No one said anything at first. Students looked at her, then quickly away. But she walked with her head high. Her beads clicked like a rhythm. No longer noise, but a heartbeat. In the Calloway stared out the window again. Her usual coffee cup sat untouched on the table. She remembered the mayor's words, identity, dignity, and the fact that a little girl's joy was crushed before the school bell even rang. For the first time in years, she felt uncertain, not about the rules, but about herself. She reached for her phone, opened the calendar app, and typed something into a slot for next week. Meeting, cultural sensitivity and representation, all staff. Then quietly, she got up and walked down the hall. The auditorium was nearly full. It wasn't a special event, just a routine school assembly. But word had spread that the mayor would return to speak, and curiosity had filled the room with a low, nervous buzz. Amara sat quietly in the third row, wearing her school uniform and her braids. Unchanged. Her mother sat beside her. Her grandmother too. On the stage, faculty members took their seats in a neat row of chairs. And finally, Mayor Elias Benton stepped up to the microphone. He didn't carry notes. He didn't wear a flag pin. He simply stood there, looking out at the students, the teachers, the parents, and then at Amara. "Some of you may be wondering why I came back," he began. "The truth is, I never left." A murmur passed through the room. "I never left because what happened here wasn't just about a hairstyle. It was about how we see each other, how we treat each other, and what we teach our children to believe is acceptable." He paused. "When I was a boy, I used to walk past a barber shop where a sign on the window said, 'No afros.' I didn't understand it then. I just knew it made me feel like I had to hide." He turned slightly to the side, toward the row of staff. "Last week, a young girl walked into this school wearing her crown, not on her head, but in her roots, in the colors, the beads, the time and love woven into each braid. And she was told to take it off." A few gasps echoed softly. "That girl," he said, gesturing toward Amara, "didn't fight back with anger. She didn't shout or run. She simply sat outside, alone, trying to understand why being herself was suddenly wrong." He turned back to the crowd. "And I couldn't walk away from that." Behind the scenes, Ms. Calloway stood backstage, watching through the curtain. Her chest felt something tight. Inside her, something she'd buried under decades of policy and tradition, was stirring. She didn't recognize the woman she had been last week, but she was starting to see the one she could become. The mayor continued, "This is not about pointing fingers. It's about asking questions, the kind that make us uncomfortable, because comfort doesn't create progress. Courage does." He stepped back from the mic. The room remained quiet. Then, one by one, hands began to clap. First, a few, then more. Soon, the entire auditorium was filled with applause, not loud, not frenzied, but genuine. Amara's grandmother placed a hand on her back, and Amara, for the first time in days, smiled fully. A week later, the school launched a new initiative called Roots and Respect, a student-led project celebrating cultural identity through workshops, discussions, and storytelling. Posters of historical black figures were placed around the hallways. Dress code guidelines were revised to include protective and cultural hairstyles, and Ms. Calloway, she did something no one expected. At the next school-wide staff meeting, she stood up and said, "I was wrong." The room fell into stunned silence. "I believed I was protecting order, but I now see I was enforcing erasure. I can't undo what I did to Amara, but I can begin to listen and to learn." She looked directly at Amara's mother, who nodded in acknowledgement, not as an enemy forgiven, but as a witness heard. In her next class, Amara was asked to give a short presentation about someone who inspires her. She stood in front of the chalkboard, nervous but calm. "My inspiration," she said, "is my grandma. She taught me that beauty isn't something you fix, it's something you wear, and you never apologize for it." Her classmates clapped, this time without hesitation. Later that afternoon, as Amara left the school building, she spotted a familiar figure near the gates. Mayor Benton stood under a tree, hands in his pockets. She ran over. "You came back," she said. He smiled. "Told you I never really left." "Everyone liked your speech." He raised an eyebrow. "Even the principal." Amara laughed, a clear, bright sound. "She's different now. Maybe not all the way, but she tries." "That's all we can ask," he said, crouching slightly to look her in the eyes. "You did more than just go to school, Amara. You changed it." He tapped one of the beads in her braid gently. "Don't ever take this crown off." She nodded. "I won't." That night, as the city lights flickered on and the quiet hum of the neighborhood settled into sleep, Amara sat by her bedroom window, sketching her face in a notebook, braids, beads, smile and all. She looked at the drawing for a long time. Then she wrote just below it, "I belong." It had been 3 months since the day Amara sat alone on those front steps, 3 months since her braids had been called a disruption. 3 months since a grown woman in power tried to shrink her spirit. 3 months since one man with a calm voice and a sharp sense of justice refused to look away. And in that time, everything and nothing had changed. Ms. Calloway still walked the same polished halls each morning, but now she paused to greet each student by name. She asked questions. She listened, sometimes uncomfortably, always attentively. Gone was the principal who demanded silence. In her place stood a woman, slowly, painfully learning the value of presence over control. In her office she kept a photo now, not of herself with district officials or award ceremonies, but of Amara, speaking at the launch of the Roots and Respect program, with her braids proudly decorated in new silver beads that sparkled like stars. The program had grown. What began as a simple initiative had turned into a movement within the school. Students of all backgrounds shared their family traditions. Parents came to read books in their native languages. One art teacher even turned the cafeteria into a pop-up museum of cultural identity. And Amara, she was no longer the girl with the hair. She had become something more powerful, a symbol of truth spoken gently, but unshakably. Still, not every day was perfect. There were whispers, sometimes. A raised eyebrow from a substitute teacher, a classmate's side comment, half meant, half malicious, but Amara had changed too. Now, when she walked through the school doors each morning, she walked like someone who had faced erasure and chose instead to expand. She no longer bent herself to fit, she simply stood. One Friday afternoon, after the final bell, Amara was called to the office. She thought maybe it was a schedule change or a meeting with her guidance counselor. Instead, she found Mayor Benton waiting in one of the chairs, flipping through a book from the reading corner. He stood when she entered, smiling. "I won't take up much of your time," he said. "Just wanted to tell you something." She nodded. "There's a school in another district," he continued, "small, mostly rural. They just reached out asking for help revising their student handbook." He pulled a folder from his coat. Inside was a printed version of the Roots and Respect program. "They want to use this," he said. "With your permission, of course." Amara stared at the folder. "Why me?" He crouched to meet her eyes. "Because it started with you, not me, not the policy. You. You were brave enough to cry where everyone could see, and still show up the next day. That's more powerful than any speech I could have made." He handed her the folder. "What do you think?" Amara opened it slowly. Her name was on the bottom of the first page, inspired by the courage of Amara Walker. "I think," she said, "they should add braids to the school logo." He laughed. "I'll pass it along." Then, more quietly, "I'm proud of you, kid." She beamed. "Thanks. Me too." That evening, Amara sat beside her grandmother in the living room, the same one where her braids were first woven that morning months ago. Together, they looked at an old photo album. One picture showed her great-grandmother in black and white, wearing thick cornrows and a simple dress, standing beside a wooden sign that read, "Colored Entrance." Amara traced the edge of the photo with her finger. "She looked strong," she whispered. "She was," her grandmother said. "And so are you." Amara nodded, eyes steady. "She never got to wear her hair in freedom," the girl said. "But I do. And because of you," her grandmother added, "more girls will." In her room later that night, Amara stood in front of the mirror. She didn't pose. She didn't smile. She just looked. At the girl who had once been told she was too much. At the girl who chose to stay herself anyway. Some revolutions don't come with riots or headlines. Sometimes they begin in silence, in a quiet hallway, in a single sentence spoken calmly, in the way one girl refuses to believe that her existence needs correction, and from that refusal, a school changes, a city learns, and a future brightens, one braid, one voice, one soul at a time.